last year I did a women-only run of Unicorn Overlord, followed by a men-only run a few months later. And for most people, that'd be the end of it. After all, a lot of people really just consider men and women when it comes to gender and whatnot. I would know because I'm non-binary, and I've only been able to use my actual pronouns in like 3 or 4 games, and all of them came out within the last 3 years. Unicorn Overlord is not one of those games. Instead, it firmly places itself on the other side of the spectrum by making classes gender-locked. You have your male classes and your female classes. However, there are a few classes that are shared by both sexes. So what if I enforce my desire to break the binary upon the game? As such, I ask the question, can you beat Unicorn Overlord only using gender-neutral classes? To which I say, no. An unsurprising answer if you've seen my women-only run. Just like with that run, I only have Chloe to start with, as the soldier is one of our 6, yes, 6 available classes this run. For those unaware, that's about a 5th the number of classes I got in my other runs. From my experience, I can tell you all now that you cannot beat any of the game using only Chloe. If you lower the difficulty to story, your ability to win is basically up to RNG, and it's not exactly in your favor, so until I obtain more soldiers, Elaine will be assisting Chloe. Once our first battle is cleared, I then had to consider my choice of battles carefully. As soon as I reach D rank Renown, I'll be able to hire new units, but the forts I have access to right now will only provide me with soldiers. Now, soldiers are good if you want to fight cavalry, but their main duty is as that of a support class, making them fairly worthless on their own. However, there are 2 classes I'll have easy access to before fighting Renault, those being the Warrior and Sellsword. As such, I beelined my way towards Berenice to fight her. I'm thankfully on level for this map due to only using 1 unit so far, but I also can't spread stamina consumption for the same reason. As such, I had to take this map slow. Almost too slow, as in I beat the map with only 2 seconds remaining, kind of slow. It's moments like this that really make you yearn for story mode's 9 stamina, but we stick with tactical for the challenge of it. Thankfully, stamina shouldn't be an issue in the future as we've obtained Berenice and reached D rank Renown. This means we're now able to recruit the 2 sellswords from the fort nearby, the only 2 sellsword hires available in Cornea before fighting Renault. Now that we're equipped with proper teams, we can abandon Elaine and put in the work to recruit a few warriors like Morden and Nina. With our ranks bolstered, it was then time to fight Renault. Unlike with my previous runs, this was very difficult. See, with women only, you get Fran's unit, who's really useful for taking down Renault thanks to her effectiveness against cavalry, along with having good magic defense. Men only, while lacking in magic defense, still had really good attack power, along with things like thieves that could simply ignore enemy attacks. This time, I'm stuck with 3 class types that are lacking on the defensive front. No magic defense means the wizards can nuke me if I don't kill them fast enough, and no good defensive walls means I have no protection from physical units. The most I have going for me are that soldiers are effective against cavalry, warriors against armored, and that sellswords are strong. I'm essentially a glass cannon here. And this works fine, until I reach Renault. My unit struggles to kill him thanks to him having a well-balanced unit. With his cavalry gaming and witch, he's easily able to obliterate my units. Not to mention, Renault has a sanguine lance to heal himself with. So I decided to simply run face first into him until I eventually killed him. Doing so nearly destroyed my units. But this is only part 1 of the map, for you see, we also have to fight Galerius. Galerius loves to inflict status ailments and bring you down to 1 HP with Fallen One, and I have no way to counteract this like I did with Thieves in Men Only. My best strategy was to keep running at him with chip damage until he died. I almost lost to him, going down to 2 units. But with the help of summoned warriors, I was able to just barely get through and defeat Galerius. With that out of our way, I then returned my focus towards cleaning up the rest of Cornea. What's important is recruiting Melisandre right away. She's a sword fighter, our 4th usable unit type. And I can already hear some of you saying that I can't recruit her as Elaine is required to battle, which is only half true. He just needs to exist in a single battle. This has no real effect on the map, and it's enough to complete the recruitment condition. I'm also allowing this as I did similar things for women and men only, so I don't really feel like stopping now. Also, you know, because I love Melisandre, I can't just abandon her, guys. Come on. This is great, though, as we now have Melisandre and 2 new sword fighters that we can recruit. Aside from her, there's no one else we can really make use of in Cornea, which means I get to enjoy some free divine shards and elixirs. Up next, Drachenhold. For entering the country, we immediately obtain Virginia and Leia. While it's normally nice to get a broken unit and a free Lapis Pendant, we sadly cannot use Virginia. However, we can use the unit the Lapis Pendant came with. Normally, Leia isn't considered a great sword fighter, but she's one of the few units I get for free. Not to mention I have plans for her in the future. For now, I shove her in the back row of one of my units. I need her to gain some experience in order to be nearly as good of a frontliner as Melisandre, for, you see, sword fighters learn parry once they reach level 10. Parry is one of our greatest lifesavers this run, as it nullifies the damage of one physical attack, giving you back 1 AP in the process. This helps make up for the sword fighter's lackluster attack and defense stats by allowing them both more chances to attack and some level of damage nullification. Of course, they can't parry magic attacks, but they do also have high initiative and evasion stats, meaning they have a decent chance of avoiding magic, or killing a mage before they have a chance to cause any harm. And to add to our sword fighter tactics, we get Aramis for completing the first proper map in Drachenhold. We also get Berengaria, but our queen sadly isn't in a gender-neutral class. Before anyone complains in the comments, I know that there are 2 male Dark Marquis and 2 female, but they are entirely different classes with completely different movesets, so they count as unique classes from one another. Or in fewer words, Berengaria is in a Berengaria-specific class. Our lack of Berengaria is fine though, because as I said before, we have sword fighters. By this point, I'd realized that sword fighters can work as decent frontliners thanks to their decent HP and defensive stats, which meant my more powerful units like sellswords or warriors were easier to keep alive. So, with sword fighters and soldiers alike taking the front, I could guarantee that units could survive at least a handful of battles before needing any amount of healing. The game does try to make itself harder by introducing the desert maps. Normally you want to have flyers so you don't suffer the desert debuff on your speed, but that doesn't matter too much when you can use light feathers to make up for this. However, once I finish the desert, I gain access to promoted units. With this power in hand, I dropped everything to go pick up Ridiel. I had tried to get her earlier, but realized my units weren't powerful enough at the time. But now that I have promoted units, I have a better chance at survival. This is important as Ridiel provides us with our 5th usable class, the Elven Archer. For those not in the know, Elven Archers are probably my favorite class in the game. And you might be wondering why I'd go out of my way to get an Elven Archer right now. Well, they're a powerful support class. Now, normally you're supposed to use Elven Archers as a sort of counter to Shamans. While the Shaman is all about dropping debuffs on your unit, the Elven Archer has access to skills that will nullify these debuffs. They can also use Mystic Conferral to add magic damage to your physical fighters. Both of these aspects are extremely useful to me, considering that until now we basically had to face tank debuffs, not to mention warriors being our only real counter to high defense units. However, what's of interest to me is the Elven Archer's Selfless Heal. Selfless Heal is one of those skills that you either love or hate due to how it's triggered. See, the idea is that if your Elven Archer is healed, they will use Selfless Heal to then impart party-wide healing. This is an extremely powerful skill, but it requires messing with your tactics to ensure it gets used. Thankfully, we have access to the soldier class, which has the first aid skill. First aid will heal an ally at the end of combat, so if I use tactics to only target an elven unit with healing, then I can make sure that first aid is always used on an Elven Archer, which means that every combat will end with an Elven Archer healing the full party. This does have some drawbacks though. If someone dies before the end of combat, then the Elven Archer won't heal them. This only works to make sure that units who are alive stay alive and healthy. And the other issue is that if the Elven Archer dies, then they can't heal the party. The second issue is less likely to happen though, so long as I keep my archers in the back row and protected. With the boon known as Renault now added to my ranks, I immediately forget to add her to one of my units. It doesn't matter right now though, as my promoted units slaughter the enemy in the next story map. I was planning to defeat the commander here, but ended up hitting the kill limit first. I did remember Renault in time for the Drachenhold finale though. And oh boy, was her unit a beautiful creation. While they weren't the most powerful of my units, they were the most survivable, thanks to her healing abilities. Not to mention her ability to provide ranged assists was of some use during the map. Not necessarily for damage, but for messing with RNG. While I'm 100% capable of explaining the tactics a lot of my unit work is based around, there's no way I can explain RNG for this game. All you need to know is it's very vibes-based. You get a feel for it as you play the game, and one of the most vital vibes you learn is that RNG is pretty static. The game will do what it says, and the only way to stop it is by burning RNG with actions, something that ranged assists are very good at doing. More importantly though, once we've saved Berengaria, which by the way, she was abducted, we gain access to the towns around Castle Soldraga. The most important of these towns is a little one hidden in the mountains. You can access it through this cave near the castle, and what makes this town so important is this unique item called the Dirty Gambler's Coin. Now, if you've played the game, you might know about the Gambler's Coin. It's a neat piece of equipment that you can buy in quite a few towns throughout Drachenhold. With this equipped, a unit gains access to the Inspiration skill, which buffs an ally's attack and critical damage by 30 and 50% respectively. This is extremely busted, which is why Inspiration also hits the buffed ally with a debuff to their accuracy. Now you can understand why it's a Gambler's Coin. You have the chance to output massive damage, but at the cost of probably not even being able to land your attack. However, there is a way around that. What if you use this inspiration on a true strike? This means no matter your accuracy, the attack will land. And lucky for us, the sword fighter starts off with Keen Edge. Not only is this attack a true strike, but it also has a 50% crit rate. This means we can benefit not only from the buff to our base damage, but we have a decent chance to take advantage of the critical damage buff as well. However, our big issue would have been using tactics to make sure Inspiration only gets used on sword fighters. That's where the Dirty Gambler's Coin comes into play. See, this version of the coin has wide Inspiration, which will buff an entire row with Inspiration. So if we set tactics so that the buff is only used on a specific row, we can put a sword fighter in said row to make certain they can benefit from the buff. But why stop there? Why not fill the entire row with sword fighters? Then we'll have 3 whole fighters making use of the Inspiration buff with no drawbacks. We get our first look into how powerful this tactic is as we enter Elheim. With minimal effort, Aramis's unit is capable of destroying a good deal of enemies he comes across. The only real counters to his unit are armored units and snipers, which thankfully can be handled by either Berenice or Ridial's units. With these tactics in my pocket, I've essentially solved the puzzle that is this unit restriction. Of course, relying on gimmicks can sometimes get me into trouble, but it's mostly smooth sailing as I make my way through Elheim, and speaking of Elheim, it's here where we gain access to our 6th and final usable class type, that being the Elven Fencer. The Elven Fencer is a pretty interesting class. They're the magical equivalent of the Sword Fighter, though since I've mostly figured out my unit builds at this point, they kinda just get thrown around in my character log. I'll be honest in saying that I haven't figured out the usage of Elven Fencers myself, despite the hundreds of hours I put in this game. Anyways, back to the game. Saving Eltelinda is pretty easily doable. My biggest issue throughout Elheim, though, is that there are a fair amount of magic users, which is probably my greatest downfall with my units. If I can't kill a magic attacker fast enough, they can destroy me. Not to mention their magic assists can be devastating for me at times. But we pull through, cleansing Eltelinda of the Zenoiran magic before moving on to the Nasthirion. Before we can reach the finale, though, we have to deal with Baltro. His gimmick of raising the dead is slightly problematic due to him re-raising units led by Elven Archers and Fencers, which is to say, units with ranged and magic assists. I need to stay on my toes to find ways to work around these assists. There are classes whose leader abilities will mitigate assist damage, but these classes are things like Hoplites, Fighters, Radiant Knights, and Shaman, as well as characters like Joseph and Virginia. All these classes are gender locked, meaning I don't get access to them. So I need to get through this map before assists destroy me. I found that the best workaround was hoping that either the assists would miss, or my units would survive and be brought back to full health through the use of Elven Archers. With Berenice's unit now bringing Ridiel into the fold, they're easily able to get through most issues. And while this does mean Ridiel was removed from a unit, she was easily replaced by Lena Logos. I am in Elheim after all, so I have access to plenty of Elven Archers to fill out my ranks. Once Baltro is dealt with, we can take on Alcina in the Elheim finale. Normally I would just spend my time focusing on taking the Nasthirion gates before making my way towards Alcina. However, knowing my unit's susceptibility to assists, I knew I'd have to handle the command posts near Alcina before reinforcements could show up and destroy whoever was defending the command post. So I sent Berenice and Aramis to the north in order to take the gates, while Morden and Ithilion's units would take on the western strongholds. Morden is easily capable of taking out the strongholds on his own, thanks to Lena Logos keeping the unit alive, but Ithilion was of some use thanks to his magic assist, as well as through taking control of the catapult. Thankfully, with the area around Alcina cleared, it was easy to redeploy Berenice right by the witch to easily destroy her. And thanks to having units garrisoned in the other Nasthirion gates, I don't have to deal with Alcina's gimmick. With Elheim saved, Eltelinda provides us with the Ring of the Maiden, which means I can now hand it over to a character of my choice. So I pulled characters from my main unit, and it was decided that Melisandre would get the ring this playthrough. Of course, that means we have to hold off on giving her the ring until we make decent progress in Bastorias, as her final rapport conversation occurs there. Which means it's time to handle Bastorias. This place is a bit of a double-edged sword for me. On the one hand, this is the most difficult of the countries to get through. Bestrels are simply built different, and their gimmicky nature can make them difficult to fight at times. But on the other hand, low percent is my bread and butter. And for those unaware, half of low percent at this point is just going through Bastorias with your starting Cornea characters. To say I know Bastorias' maps, or at the very least its story maps, like the back of my hand, is a severe understatement. And it's this knowledge of mine that made me a bit overconfident. I'm used to handling these maps with only 1 or 2 units made up of basically only base classes, but those units are also usually at level 30 or so. Having been overly reliant on Berenice and Morden's units meant that the rest of my units weren't really up to snuff, so I basically had to keep relying on my overpowered units, which can spiral out of control if they're overly reliant on certain gimmicks or odd tactics. This wasn't a huge issue for the first story map in Bastorias, but it became painfully clear as I continued to clear maps. Still, I decided to push forward as I leaned into some of the slightly more obscure cheese strats. One of my favorite obscure strats that I've been making use of more and more throughout this run are provoke strats. Now, for those of you who know the game, you may be questioning how I can use provoke. After all, that's a Valor skill locked to Fighters and Berengaria, both illegal classes in this challenge. However, I do have access to Beckoning Bells, which are consumables that allow me to provoke enemy units. Now, provoke isn't interesting on its own. It aggroes an enemy towards you, and that's not always desirable. Not to mention that you can't provoke garrisoned enemies. However, not everyone realizes that a unit only has the garrison status if they're hunkered down in a stronghold. So, while you might think you're garrisoned while placed in, say, a watchtower or mantlet, that's actually not the case, and you can provoke units to remove them from unfavorable terrain. You can also provoke enemies that are manning siege weaponry. If you provoke a unit that's using, say, a ballista, you can essentially remove the danger of a ballista until either provoke wears off or you kill the unit. This allows me to remove of dangers on the map and even make them more easily accessible to then use on the enemy. However, this tactic is only useful if I know my unit can survive against whoever they provoke. And even then, it's really just good for safely removing ballista or watchtowers. When those don't pose an issue, it's just an uphill battle of me using 2 units and change to fight against a whole army. By the time I finished the Blizzard map, I knew I'd need to get my other units up to speed in order to make the rest of Bastorias just a little bit safer, especially since I was having some difficulty with the easier Bastorias maps. The next 2 story maps are where it gets hard. So, I spent some time sigil grinding to get my units up to snuff before moving to take on Ryman. The grind was well worth it too, as I could now split my army up more easily as need be, and my units definitely proved themselves strong enough as they were capable of taking all the strongholds scattered across this map. And taking the strongholds is the hard part here. Once the way was cleared, I could easily take down Ryman. He can be fairly dangerous for my units considering he's a warlock, but I'm simply built different, and can take advantage of his watchtowers to use against him. With the area secured, I can finally watch Melisandre's final rapport conversation with Elaine. Doing so now allows me to give her the Ring of the Maiden, and I do so immediately as the ring will provide +5 to all her stats along with 1 additional PP, which is extremely useful for her as each PP equates to 1 whole extra parry. Now that we're no longer wifeless, it's time to finish Bastorias. I know I've emphasized before that Bastorias is difficult, but the finale is the true test of strength. If you find the other maps difficult casually, then you'll find this one to be a complete brick wall. Without flyers, you're essentially put through a choke point on this map, where siege weaponry and watchtowers are placed perfectly to destroy your chances of survival. Since I'm stuck to the ground and thus have to walk through this perfect killing machine, I'd have to find a way to make it safe. And if you listened to me earlier about provoke strats, then you already know half the strategy here. By immediately taking the enemy stronghold, I can deploy and dismiss units as need be. This allows me to comfortably send off Berenice's unit to take the northwestern stronghold on the map. Taking the stronghold is important to prevent further enemy reinforcements. As for the watchtowers and catapults, I took advantage of how easy it is for me to deploy units by provoking key enemy points. This would easily clear the towers for me to make use of as need be, not to mention it would remove of the catapult issue, and thanks to having a stronghold nearby, I didn't even have to worry about provokers staying alive. If a unit perished in combat, I could just use one of my many hallowed Cornash to revive them. From there, I could immediately redeploy them. Through these tactics, I was easily able to force my way through the choke point and trigger Elgor's reinforcements. Which is to say, once you approach the village near the bridge, Elgor will summon 12 whole units across the map who can easily destroy you thanks to their numbers. By having taken the northwestern hold though, I was able to prevent one of these sets of reinforcements from showing, meaning I only had to deal with 8 units instead of 12. I bunkered down in some garrisons to handle these reinforcements, as they can be extremely difficult to take head-on, but once they were removed from the field, it was easy enough to just send my full army on the march towards Elgor. By having all my units together, I was easily able to switch units out depending on the matchups for battles, helping to spread both stamina consumption and damage taken. I also made sure to send out a single unit to handle the watchtowers, as the healing assists can mess with you if you don't insta-kill a unit. This also meant I could use the watchtowers myself, as I could station my assist units in them as need be. Through the culmination of all my knowledge, I was easily able to take down Elgor, finishing the most difficult of the campaigns. Which just leaves us with Albion. Albion is an interesting country, where you can come in through Bastorias and are required to do at least one side quest to reach the story. Or you can enter through Elheim and completely ignore the entire country as it drops you right where you need to be to start the story. Now, when I did men only, I basically ignored Albion to finish the game. However, having seen how my units suffered quite a bit in Bastorias, I thought it'd be a good idea to do the side content in Albion to get a good feel for how they'd interact with angels. My reasoning for this is that angel units are very much gimmick-based. Unlike other units, it's pretty hard to do something normal with angels, as they're each built around some very specific gimmick. Feather swords are possibly the most normal of the angels, where their whole deal is continuously buffing their evasion and defense while they attack. The feather shield gets funky with reflecting magic and generally being a nuisance if you rely on magic, which thankfully makes them the least problematic angel type in this playthrough. The feather staff is all about healing to the point that they can overheal units. This isn't an issue if you can kill the unit before the feather staff has the ability to heal them out of control though. And last is the feather bow, whose entire point of existence is to be a pain in the ass. They love to inflict blind. Blind sucks because if you're inflicted with it, you will miss your next attack no matter what, even if it's a true strike. It's due to the feather bow's annoying love for blinding units that I wanted to see how my units would fare. Luckily, it was looking like my units would be able to handle the angels fairly well, as they were able to hold their own in my initial Albion map. And as I continued on, I realized I had the perfect unit to combat the Featherbow's love for blinding your team. See, I may have mentioned I have a ranged assist unit, and to make that unit have powerful ranged assists, I simply filled the back row with Elven Archers. I then added 2 sergeants to the front row to make sure they can survive getting attacked and easily allow for selfless heal strats. Now, if you remember, despite me loving Elven Archers for their healing ability, they also have an ability to combat debuffs. Debuffs include afflictions, which means they can heal the blind status. Not to mention they have the start of battle skill Pure Field. This will give a full unit protection against 1 debuff, which means they can prevent the feather bows from inflicting me with blind. This dynamic created a weird case where my ranged assist unit worked as the perfect gimmick to counter featherbow units. Once I realized this, I made it my goal to use my ranged assist unit to immediately take watchtowers, thus switching whose hands the terrain advantage was in. With this understanding, I'd completed the set of knowledge necessary for this challenge. I could use everything I've learned to easily take down Nigel, and while the Albion finale is a long map, it's extremely easy if you know exactly how to deal with angels. There was very little that I considered dangerous outside of maybe Sonadio's unit. But as always, Berenice's unit was easily able to bring the boss down. By liberating Albion, we now have access to the sanctuaries across Fevrith. By visiting these, we're able to fully restore the power of cleansing to the Ring of the Unicorn, which is to say that we've gained access to the true ending of the game, should we so desire it. With the strength we've gained, we easily clear the way to Gran Corin, and it was time to begin the final battle. This battle put everything we've learned to the test. I decided to enter from the central command post. From here, I was able to split my army to take on two halves of the map. I decided to send Berenice's unit with one other unit to take on the western side of the map. I did so as this side has the easier bosses to defeat, and I wanted to minimize the number of deployments I had over here. Thankfully, Morden's unit is almost as powerful as Berenice's, so he can handle the bosses on the other side of the map. As such, I sent him off to fight Helonius, while my ranged assist and non-binary flag units took care of the angels and Bestrels to help clear the way towards Belisarius. While this happened, on the eastern side, Berenice was slowly taking out Theodora with her own ballista, and the one unit sent with her was taking the town of Sorie-Calm. Taking this town is important as it spawns a battering ram behind Narcisse, which will be important for later. Once Helonius was defeated, the Drakkenhold reinforcements made their appearance. Thankfully, they're green units, meaning I have no control over them. This means they're able to swoop in and take out some of the Bestrels from the north, while I force my way through them from the south, working as a perfect pincer strategy. Not long after, Berenice finishes off Theodora, meaning she can move on to trigger Narcisse, summoning her reinforcements. With the reinforcements on the field, I have Berenice hunker down in a nearby mantlet so that she can fight the reinforcements without losing stamina. While I'm stalling killing Narcisse, I'm working on getting Morden to Belisarius. With a few heavy swings, I was easily able to clear the barricades and magic mines that would slow my advance. And thanks to the green units, I didn't need to worry too much about enemy units. Once Morden defeated Belisarius, I had all my units retreat except for Berenice. This is important as once Berenice defeats Narcisse, all my units currently on the field will be possessed by the Zenoiran magic of control. With only Berenice out, though, only she will be inflicted with this status. Sadly, this is where Elaine has to come in. I need him to use the Cleansing Valor skill in order to free my units from this mind control. Now, technically, it could probably be possible to complete this map without Elaine or his cleansing power, but it would require some teleportation strats that I'm not sure would even work, as failure would mean losing all my units to the mind control magic. I've also given in to using Elaine here, as I had to use him at the start of the game. Still though, with the battering ram I'd gotten from visiting the village, I was easily able to break my way into Gran Corin, and Berenice had no issue fighting Galerius. It was kind of pathetic on his part. While technically that's all that's necessary to beat the game, I chose to emancipate Galerius' soul to get the true ending. This ending requires using Elaine, but I'm fine with getting it because, again, I technically already failed the challenge. With Baltro showing his true colors as the real final boss of the game, I send out Berenice's unit one last time to defeat this evil. Of course, Baltro can only be killed by Astral Blade, but Berenice's crew was easily able to kill everyone in Baltro units and bring the Necromancer himself down to 1 HP, which I'll take as a small victory. If Melisandre or Berenice could kill Baltro, then that would be a win. But I had to send in Elaine to deal the finishing blow, thus ending this challenge run. Hi, Editing Moss here. I lied. So I was just wrapping up with editing the video. Originally, this part was supposed to be a whole spiel about how Aubin and the final battle are what's holding this challenge run back from being possible, and I decided I'd get some footage to match that. Now, the footage I got of Chloe soloing the tutorial map ended with a loss. I won't lie there. But she got weirdly close to victory. So I changed up my tactics, messed with Chloe's equipment, and I tried that map again. And I won. Which means it's possible to solo the first map with Chloe. Which means the start of this challenge could be made valid. However, this victory means nothing unless I can complete 2 extra maps to unlock the ability to recruit mercenaries. Or if I complete a map that would give me a usable character. So I tried Rolf's map, and won. And then I tried Ock's map, and won. getting me to Renown rank D, and one of the starting fortresses has soldiers for me to recruit. So I guess it's possible to beat the game while only ever using gender-neutral classes in combat. But what about the Galerius problem? Well, an idea did come to mind during the run, but I never tested it out because I thought it wouldn't work, and I'd given in to the fact that the challenge was already impossible. However, knowing the start of the run is possible now, I'm willing to try. So, what is this forbidden technique? It's killing my own units. Just like I did before, I had only one unit out who would defeat the final Dark Marquis. In this case, it's Bastorias. This time, I'm using Aramis to defeat him because I need Berenice's unit to defeat Galerius. Whoever defeats the final Marquis isn't getting cleansed. Once Galerius arrives on the scene, I deploy a unit and teleport them to one of the watchtowers that was by Narcisse. They would then get into the battering ram, which I set up by the gate before defeating Belisarios. From here, they can break down the gate and fight their way towards the nearest garrison inside the walls. I know they won't succeed, but they thankfully get low on health before Galerius finishes his Valor charge. Once he's done charging, he uses Abyssal Miasma to control their mind. That's when I deploy my next unit, teleporting them to the same location to finish capturing the garrison. Of course, this does mean they have to fight my last unit, but thankfully the unit was weak enough to be easily beaten. By taking the garrison, I can then deploy Berenice's unit close to Galerius, allowing her to fight him before he can use Abyssal Miasma again, which means I can defeat Galerius without Elaine's cleansing. With these discoveries, this means it's actually possible to beat Unicorn Overlord while only using gender-neutral classes, assuming you go for the normal ending. Hell, this even means that women only is technically possible. It does come with the caveat that you have to play the start of the game on story, but I will accept this win. As for my final thoughts on this run, I really enjoyed it. It's obviously more difficult than my previous class restriction runs, suffering from the weaknesses of both without any of their saving graces. But it resulted in a challenge that was like a big puzzle for me to solve. And once Renault was defeated, I technically had access to all the classes, and thus all the tools I needed for this run. As such, the whole run, I was just iterating on my teams, checking what did and didn't work at each point in the game until I found a way to solve it. The solution being whatever the hell I fed to Melisandre. I didn't really point this out during the video, but she kind of did ridiculous damage for a Swordmaster. There was also plenty of tactical item usage to help me find my way through the puzzles that made up the map design. I imagine my strats would have fallen apart on expert difficulty given the stupid item restriction it has. Still though, at no point was this challenge super easy. Every country brought their own gimmicks that found a way to challenge me, and I loved it. I imagine I was only really able to find my way through these challenges thanks to the countless hours I continue to spend on trying to optimize low percent. I probably wouldn't recommend this challenge to a casual player of the game, but if you feel confident in your abilities, then I highly recommend this challenge. It'd be interesting to see if someone could do this with the item restrictions on Expert or the permadeath of True Zenoiran. I'd also recommend not soloing this first map with Chloe. It's fine if you use Elaine. It's fine. Just for the first few maps until you get other units. I know I soloed like 3 maps with Chloe, but I wouldn't recommend it. Okay? Anyways, that's all I have for this challenge. I put a link in the description if you want to see the gameplay for this run. There should also be a link to the channel Discord if you want the hottest memes, or to see me lose my mind in real time like what happened to this run. I think it's time I rest for a bit though, until I inevitably return with an even stupider Unicorn Overlord challenge.